They gave us 2 weeks to move. 1942. My mother was pregnant with me, and some people got burned out. One of the cemeteries that was in the middle of the community was in the way of the airstrips, and was completely destroyed. Now it's been 80 years since we have lost our land. The question to me is, why? Why did you do this to us? We fought in every war, starting from the Revolutionaries' War, and we are still here. The blood, the sweat, the tears of this soil. This is our land. This is America. I am an American. Why have you not given us our land back?
The white man arrived on big wooden boats. He just took what was not his and burned what was ours. He took me away from everything I have ever known on his big wooden boat. Hunger, disease, misery. Most of us died at sea, bodies thrown overboard daily. He took pleasure in our pain. Few of us survived the brutality of man and sea. We were sold like cattle. He did things to me. Unspeakable things. When he was done, I was put to work with the others. But the white man did not know that a new life grew in my belly.
The question as to how the Gullah people came to Harris Neck. From what we understand and based on the story that's been told, the matriarch of the family is a young girl that was taken into slavery from Africa, from a small village in Sierra Leone. She was brought into the port of Savannah, and she was sold into slavery. But what we know is that she was pregnant. We don't know whether she was raped on the ship or whether she was raped or just had by the owner that bought her. and she had a half-white child. And now we do know the name of that child. Her name was Catherine. She had children, and one such child was Mustafa. And so Mustafa is the father of my grandfather, Charles Shaw, and also of my aunt, Amelia Shaw Darley. You know, that story is a story of us coming into Harris Neck. Well, Amelia S. Darley, Amelia Shaw Darley, was my aunt, and I was 8 years old when she died in 1955. Don't remember a lot about her, but I just know that she was the beginning to us as a family, the Moran family, the Relaford family, when we talk about our connection to Africa.
He was named Mustafa Delegal. He's too white to be black. He's too black to be white. There's a whole lot of things going on that is confusing and they don't like. And here comes General Sherman marching from Atlanta to Savannah, the Civil War. He running away, he joins the army. Get injured in Savannah. He musters out in Beaufort, South Carolina. General Sherman issued Field Order 15, giving us all the outlying islands and some places 30 miles inland on the mainland. Well, Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. The president after him, Johnson, was forced to rescind Field Order 15. All these islands were ours. And they tried to destroy every record of history that it was ever given to us, all the way from North Carolina to the northern tip of Florida. They were ours. They were taken.
A woman named Margaret Ann Harris was the owner of the 2,687 acres, which came to be known as Harris Neck. At the end of the Civil War, actually, her last will and testament is dated September 2nd, 1865. And we found a handwritten copy of that in an archives in Atlanta. She left her land to a man named Robert Delegal. It reads, "I have tried to leave this to whites, but they have cheated me at every turn. I now leave this land, all of it, to Robert Delegal, my favorite former slave." And the return was that he take care of her, I think she was in her 80s at the time, and her son. So she left the land to her favorite former slave, Robert Delagal. And then over the generations from then until 1942, it became this community of 70 plus families. It was a thriving community. There were only two things that were purchased when they had their community from outside the land: sugar and flour. Everything else was grown on the land. Almost everybody had their own garden / small farm. People lived off the rivers and off the ocean, and then in the off seasons they hunted. So they had everything almost virtually everything they needed from the land and the water.
The last will and testament of Margaret Harris. And so that's how we came in possession of the land. Now, here you have a group of 79 to 80 families that's living on the land harmoniously with each other. And not only that, they were self-sufficient. They built their own boats, they farmed, they oystered, they shrimped, they fished, and they had a pretty subsistent lifestyle. And then come 1942,
when I'm out on the water, oh man, you just feel so good. The air that you breathe is pure. There's no factories and stuff around this area. And then you get out there, you can just relax. When you get in that water, it's a whole different feeling. That air blowing on you, so real, so good to be out there. That wouldn't be no other place. Because you're just in a place all by yourself. Even though you got cell phones, you're like disconnected from everybody. And just you and God and the world. But you get out there and just live your own life, you know. My family has been here since the 1900s. We are third generation oyster pickers. We're just doing stuff that we've been born and raised doing all our lives. We will continue to do it, and I'm doing it, and my brother's doing it, and my son, he's be doing it too. And so this is God's heaven to us. You know, we're just so blessed to be here. My name is William Timmons, and I'm associated with the Harris Neck Seafood in Harris Neck, Georgia. Me and my brother Jerome, third generation oyster pickers. My great-grandfather, his name was William Timmons. He was married to Frances Timmons, and they started an oyster factory down in the Tiger Bluffs. And he had 40 employees. He sold oysters all over the place. He had 4 boats. He had shrimp boats. He was the only one I knew that had license with the state, you know, as a black man, you know, and that back in those days. Took care of his children, taught my daddy how to do it. But by the time my daddy got of age, that's when the land was already took it away.
Well, the white citizens in McInnes County having problems with the people in Harris Neck because we didn't need them for anything. And we were very, very successful. We were doing extremely well. But the white people feel like we got to bring these black people back down to earth because they didn't want us to have that type of power because the village was self-sufficient. In 1942, you know, the World War II was really getting up and going. The merchant ships from America out of Brunswick, Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, and Charleston were taking materials to England to help them fight the war against the Germans. The German U-boats would lay wait them along the channel and would blow them up. So the military decided that they needed a place in which they can build an air base and have these planes in which they can destroy the U-boats. While looking for a place along the coast, the local politicians who was having problem with us living the way they wanted us to live, and we could live without them, they saw the opportunity of convincing the military of getting Harris Neck. Now you got to realize Harris Neck then was surrounded by a lot of uninhibited lands, which they could have gotten. But the local politicians convinced the military to take Harris Neck. They claim eminent domain, and you're familiar with eminent domain. You can take any land that the government need to combat a threat.
In 1942, just several months into the war, the Army and the Army Air Corps was looking for property on the Georgia coast to build an Army airfield to train fighter pilots. So all they were looking for, the feds, was a piece of property to build this on. The real conspiracy here, and that's exactly what it was in the taking, was by a handful of county power brokers at the time, all white, of course, one of whom was a county commissioner in the 40s and the largest white landowner on the land. So he and the sheriff at the time conspired to get the Army to take that land. And right across Harris Neck Creek, there was 3,595 acres owned by this county commissioner. And from what I've read, there was one house on 3,500 acres. And that's where the airfield could have gone. These few men, they led representatives from the War Department right to Harris Neck, literally right past not only that uninhabited land, but some other parcels that were uninhabited, and they led them right to Harris Neck. The real reason Harris Neck was taken was the people in Harris Neck were a threat to the status quo in McIntosh County because they were doing well, better than a lot of whites in the county. These powerful men were after Harris Neck, and they figured the war was the single best opportunity to get it. Now, they didn't get it personally after the war, but the county got it, and they were basically the county. So their gamble turned out to be correct for them.
You got to realize the racism of the thing. I don't know if you could understand the hatred and the envy and the jealousy. We cannot put that into words, but they had to bring us down on our knees. They had to take this land from us so that arrogance would dissipate. So what they did was they claimed eminent domain and gave us illegally 2 weeks to move out.
21 years old when they threw us out there. They treated us like animals. I was 7 months pregnant when they threw us out in that woods. 2 weeks time, tear down, get on out here, or we'll burn you out. They threw me out there. They had to hurry, make up some kind of thing before my baby came, where I wouldn't be out in the opening. It was sad the way they treated us like animals. I'll never forget.
We was given 2 weeks to move out. I was born in a lean-to shack underneath a tree, and rattlesnakes and ticks and mosquitoes and what have you. And in that lean-to shack was my grandfather, my grandmother, my mother, my father, my uncle, my brother Ray, my brother Roosevelt, and my sister Amelia. All was crammed up in that little lean-to shack and separated by blankets.
The government came in and took the property in 42. It was such a shock to the people trying to get together what they were going to do. They had nowhere to go. The thing that they were concerned about was somewhere to live, somewhere to live from out of the weather. So all of their focus was on dismantling their homes as fast as they could, get it out to the side of the road where they could try to at least build some kind of little makeshift shelter. During all of that time, the boats were on the banks just rotting away as the people were trying to survive after being evicted from the homeland. It did not have to be. Those folk who envied and did not want black folk to own such a precious piece of land worked whatever avenue they could to get them off of that land, and they eventually did. Certainly our people were not mad with the government. They said they needed the land so that the country could be protected. Well, that was good, but there were other pieces of land that could have been used. Besides that, they did promise that they would return the land, which never happened, and today the struggle is ongoing.
They tell us not to move far away because we would get out. We would be the first one to get our home back.
I've heard my cousin, Robbie Thorpe, said many times that he sat right there, and he was 12 years old, when the official from the U.S. government told his father, "Don't y'all go far, because you can get moved back after the war," and that's what they counted on. So that's why many of them just move right outside the gate. You've been to Wilson's house, so you've seen it, and everybody's in that community right there, because there was the hope that they had.
Basically, you can't, the oral agreements just don't hold up. Just because somebody says, orally says that, government agents don't have the authority to make that as a binding promise. Rick Kanaski, I'm the regional archaeologist and regional historic preservation officer for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is probably the premier conservation agency within the government. We provide both scientific research, technical support, plus dealing with threatened and endangered species.
Eminent domain was the way that the government took it, but almost every element of eminent domain was violated. So they were given, depending on who you talk to, 2 to 4 weeks, which is one of the violations. People who are against our efforts to get the land returned, they will say people were paid for their property. Well, that's disputable, because in all the documents in the National Archives, there are all these land appraisals, but there's not one single record of money being dispersed. One of the tenets of eminent domain is if you're given a price, you're able to get your own appraiser. Well, that wasn't done. Just compensation, it was not just. The white families, again, no structures on the property, they just own land, were paid 40% more than the black community, all of whom had houses and barns and garages, oyster factory, so it's comparing apples and oranges, but even in that comparison, 40% more they were paid. A study done by the General Accounting Office, and even though they researched it and gave those statistics, they concluded there was no racism involved and that the taking was just. One of the biggest violations of eminent domain, and this was decided in a US Supreme Court case, and it says that an individual, family, or community that has their land taken has to be left as well off after the taking as they were before. Everyone in Harris Neck was left homeless.
We were told that after the war that we could get the land back. Well, that didn't happen because after the war, the federal government gave the land back to the state. Well, the state don't know where Harris Neck is, so they gave it to the county. So the county fathers saw the opportunity that they can use the land and never let us have it again because they didn't want us to have that type of power. They took the airstrips, and made it a racetrack. They took some of the houses and made it a house of prostitution. They would fly in contraband from South America. One of the local politicians placed his cows on the land for $1 a year.
Here in 1942, what rights does a black man have? Who does he stand up to? They know they couldn't stand up to the local government because they were a big part of the Jim Crow South. They had no say-so in anything. They could be dealt with impunity. In other words, the whites that were there, they pretty much tell them what to do, and then you have to do it. Well, if you didn't do it, there were consequences.
We found a document which is actually a transaction between the War Department and McIntosh County. It states that the county must use Harris Neck for one and only one purpose, that is, as a county airport. Over those 13 years, the feds started hearing these stories and took the land back from the county because they violated the contract in many, many ways. The Department of Interior has owned the property since 1961, and under them, U.S. Fish and Wildlife has used the land as a national wildlife refuge since 1962.
When the Department of Interior took it over, that's when the Fish and Wildlife Service was here, so they gave it to them. Why didn't they contact us? It's anybody's guess. Why wouldn't you talk to the people that the land belonged to?
In the late 1970s, with members of the community, first generation descendants coming back from the Vietnam War, and they said, here we were, we came back and we can't even go on the old homeland. We can't even visit it, let alone having had our land and our wealth taken from us. So there was a movement that was begun in, I think, 1979. It was called People Organized for Equal Rights, and it was led by the Timmons family, and Wilson Moran was involved. The Secretary of Interior at the time, he's on camera with 60 Minutes saying, we will do everything in our power to help with the return of the land. But the Department of Interior can't just return land. It has to be an act of Congress to return it. It was a bill written, but it never made it out of committee. Nothing happened from 1981 or 82 until 2005. And we began what has become known as the Harris Neck Justice Movement.
There's no paperwork saying that they would get it back after the war. So, basically, once fee title is acquired by the government is not going, government is not going to give it back, It looks from the records like everybody was appraised the same way. It's a tricky, thing to say, well, they got less. No. So it makes it look like the white landowners are getting a lot more, per acre than the Gullah families are. But when you take out her property, owned by the Livingston family, Lily Livingston, white landowners are actually getting a couple of dollars less.
The argument that Fish and Wildlife uses as to why they can't return the land is very varied, all right? It depends on the meeting. A man named Rick Kanaski, who I think is an archaeologist for Fish and Wildlife, at a meeting in 2010 said, one of the reasons we can't allow the return of people is that Harris Neck is wall-to-wall cultural sites. That's an exact quote. Wall-to-wall cultural sites, meaning Native American sites. So we hired a very preeminent archaeological firm, and they did a study, and they found out that all of these cultural sites are south of Harris Neck. And in the land that we want, which is about 10%, what we're asking for now is about 10% of the 2,800 acre total. There are only 2 sites, one of which is the cemetery, the Gould Cemetery, the People's Cemetery. Plus, the Wally Indians and the Creeks who lived there several hundred years ago, many people in Harris Neck have Indian blood. Wilson Moran's grandfather was a Cherokee chief. The regional director at the time said another reason is the wood stork, which is the bird that was on the endangered species list until 2014. We cannot allow any development close to the ponds. Well, the Living Museum that we plan and the other components surrounding that is almost a mile. It's over 4,000 feet from the main breeding pond for the wood stork, the egrets, and the herons. If you look at any of the ornithological studies on the wood stork, doesn't matter who you look at, they call for a 100-meter setback for development building. Ours is over 4,000 feet. They have lied to us at every single meeting about important things. We all feel in the community that the tactic or the strategy that Fish and Wildlife has used from the beginning of this movement was, we'll just keep throwing things at them, and eventually they'll just go away. Well, we haven't. Several people that I've met in the whole chain of command, sorry to say it, but they're just racists, all right? They don't want this to return to a black community.
I've heard that story as well, and quite frankly, I think it's a really oversimplification of the history of and kind of a slap to the history of this community here, because this community has a much more nuanced and richer history than that one event. Yes, it could be traumatic, but the thing is, if you let that one event say this is what this community is about. All the history of the community between 1865 and 1942 just disappears. It's nothing. You understand what I'm saying? We can argue about land ownership and getting the land back, or we can collaborate and work together to protect sites, identify and protect locations and sites of importance to our community.
The one thing that drives me is that when my mother passed away in 2012, I promised her, I said, Mom, I'm going to fight to get this land back, and I'll keep doing it. And that's where I am today. I'm going to fight this until there's nothing left. Until there's nothing left. It was a major injustice done to the people of Harris Neck. Let's not assign blame. Everybody can acknowledge, oh yeah, it was racism, but doggone it, let's do something different. It's wrong. Let's just right a wrong. It's that simple. And if I had to speak to anybody that's in authority, it really takes somebody of courage and integrity to buck the tide, willingness to correct the wrong. And so why not just make it right? When you have it within your power to make it right, let's make it right. And that's what we ask for. It's real simple. Do the right thing.
What caused the whole thing? Racism, hate, envy, jealousy. But that's not what my grandpa, my grandma, my mom, and my dad taught me. Taught me to rise above the situation so I can survive and do better and maybe help somebody else. And that's what I've done. That's it. You know what I mean? To succeed, you can't let hate take over yourself. It reminds me of a song that I feel that it is me. I was born by the river in a little old tent, and just like the river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long, long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes, it is. It's been a long, long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. That's who I am.